sure I'm going to be speaking from a cultural perspective. That's kind of where I sit. I'm just going to give you what Jocelyn's response is, as opposed to, particularly because I'm so completely wedded to this holistic view of learning. And I think one of the things that immediately kind of picked up right from the very beginning was even having a column for external partners. Because if we're buying into a view that we are creating a holistic view of learning where everyone is a learner, then I would query who on earth is an external partner if we're doing that from the very beginning. Because we're starting from, I would suggest, a false and hierarchical frame that's problematic. So what frame do we start with? And I think certainly at our table, where I spent most of the time, on this table over there, we're constantly being kind of challenged with, so how do you assess that? If you've got this lovely holistic vision, what does that mean when it comes to, you know, the hard things like assessment of children, young people? But also, if we're looking at there being no external partners, how do you document the learning for an arts organization? I mean, you know, we've heard that artists learn from children all the time, but I know as someone in the cultural sector that that's very often very poorly documented. If you're working in a local area-based curriculum and you're working with a garden centre, how is that garden centre articulated? Why would they bother? Are they part of an action research project? What's in it for them? And I think, you know, from my years of partnership, it always comes back to what's in it for all of those partners. In some ways, the schools are the easy ones because they've got to go through this process of learning. But if we're bringing a culture of learning in order to create an Anthropocene new world, which is certainly what I would be a fan of, more than a fan, I think it's absolutely critical, then we need to think about what brings partners, what's the motivation for learning, and how we document that in the process. I think it's also just looking at that lovely exercise we did from the very beginning. We struggled with the threesome I was in. And when we're talking about bringing the arts to science, again, it's that challenge of one has the status quo, more often than not it is science is, and we're bringing the arts as a lovely, imaginative way that opens up minds, builds team-building skills, but it's not a reciprocal kind of relationship, how one feeds the other. And again, I know it's really hard to unpick that and work it out so that, as you said so rightly, but I need to know it's physics in order to move on from that. So I know that's hard, but I thought it was important because I know you get so stuck into the arts product of it all, the sexy arts thing, as opposed to the way that you wove the arts into the reconnaissance work you did, the whole kind of picture. And that's quite hard to communicate. I've been failing at communicating that for about a decade. And then lastly, just the thing that I wanted to pick up on that I got very excited about was this continuum of skill sets. So looking at employers, and not just employers' needs, I think we get too stuck on that. The democratic needs, what kind of citizen, global citizen, are we creating? And therefore, when we have a fantastic project in a primary school with Imaginarium, how can we develop those skill sets that have a continuum, that go right through to, you know, a postgraduate degree in Imaginarium? And then lastly, the very first thing I got excited about was finding a way of doing, I can't find myself always saying this, longitudinal research that looks at this, where this goes. When we were talking at our table about incidental learnings, you know, the surprising outcomes we all talk about. If we don't look at a longitudinal plan for capturing those things, we can limit what that learning is and we don't see the whole frame.
Although I love what the Imaginarium project and these other projects are doing, and most of my life I've been trying to get creativity into the science classroom. A lot of science classrooms when I was a teacher educator that I went into were really, really boring places, and this is common in a lot of the schools I visited around the world. They're very boring places. Actually jumping through, well, here we're jumping through the assessment framework, and particularly Ofsted. And this has a major impact. I work very closely with teachers, and I think the teachers that have been involved in this project, I'm not just saying this is part of what we've been talking about, the teachers, the senior leaders that have been involved in this project have actually used an awful lot of their own time, well over and above all the planning and all the assessing and everything that they're doing in school. So without that buy-in at senior leadership level and that buy-in by the teachers, these projects aren't going to work, I'm sad to say. I still go into classes, and it was brilliant going into the Imagineering classes because the class was full of energy and focus and engagement. A lot of the classes I go into, there's a lot of bored kids sitting around, not really terribly interested. And my great concern is that these creative projects are working in the primary sector. They are working in some schools in Coventry where they've got a combined curriculum, they call it, in Year 7 and 8, or they do the Royal Society of Arts curriculum, which is fantastic. But when you come to Year 8, or Year 9, because GCSE is now starting Year 9 in lots of schools, when you come to them, it all goes out the window. Hopefully, some of the excitement, enthusiasm, inspiration and challenge that our Imaginarium children have been engaged in within this project will stay and become a part of the, I hate it, the soft skills set. I hate the word soft skills because people think soft things aren't really important. And I think they should go back to the key skills or the essential skills, and they are really essential, and I think these skills are developing. And alongside that, we've got the subject development as well. Let me just have a look. I think the challenges then, are Ofsted, and Michael's got a brilliant example. I think Ofsted went into a school, and the inspector looked at a journal and said, you haven't got the correct homophene here. They didn't obviously have an idea what a personal journal was all about. So that's a bit of a shame, but I think they like the rest of it. The knowledge-based curriculum, you know, Mr. Gove, we have to thank you, he's gone. We have him to thank for this reintroduction of the knowledge rather than processed and skills-based curriculum, and that's going to have, this has got issues. Teachers have got to get the kids through this, and teachers are still coming to terms with the latest exam specifications and schedules of work which are absolutely appalling, and there's no idea about the sequencing of concepts or anything like that. I think AQA does Year 7, Lesson 1, series and parallel circuits. Wow, what a start to secondary science. They've already done it in primary as well. Large classes and resources. But I think, you know, going back to me and the way that I work, I used to take, if the sun was out, we'd be out, because my head of department said, do whatever you want. And it was great, and it was a wonderful time to be in the classroom, because I did what I wanted, and that was fantastic. And I couldn't actually do what teachers have to do these days at all, and I admire them greatly for doing it and getting involved with this. I love to observe the messy classrooms, as I've said, because that engagement, and I held an inter-school challenge with 9 secondary schools came out for the day, a robotics challenge last week, and those kids arrived, and from 9:30 till 2:30 there wasn't a peep of indiscipline or anything, and these were sort of Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4 pupils. They were totally engaged. They were modifying their robots. They were talking to each other. They were standing back and saying, well, no, you're the best driver, you've got to do it. We'll sort out and we'll support you and we'll do this. And that's the sort of learning that I think is proper. And that's what I think these STEAM-based projects are so good, because the arts input, you know, we all know that, you know, you think back to your own science teachers, a lot of them are really pretty boring. And they hide behind the body of knowledge, particularly physics teachers. They try to confuse and confound children rather than actually enable their understanding. And I think, and Tony said that one of our STEM ambassadors was at a school in Coventry that was showcasing STEM, and some sixth formers had been given a project to do. Just make up your own project, and they were doing it, and I think it was Antonis and a couple of STEM ambassadors. Well, then they said, well, what should we do? I said, go and ask them about what they're doing. Now these sixth formers, very bright, had no idea about, had no real understanding of the science that was going on. So, and I think it was you, Antonis, you came back to me and you said, what should we do then? And I said, well, go and explain it to them, go and teach them. Because there's a lack of understanding because the shallowness of the learning that's going on within science education is scary. So.
I'm going to try and give you the engineering perspective, although technically I'm not an engineer. So I trained as an industrial designer and then moved into a very kind of hardcore, very technical engineering environment. I've been there for 11 years, and my whole mission and what I do really is to try and get engineers to think about people's feelings and to design for real people. It's a challenge, and in order to do that I have to develop lots of different methods and ways of getting them to engage with people's feelings. So I'll go on to that in a minute, but I saw lots of analogies in kind of what's happening in STEAM with kind of the work which I've done in engineering as well. So in what you're experiencing here is you're trying to bring arts into kind of science and engineering, and what I do in my research is to try and bring more artistic and creative approaches to kind of practical engineering, so people who are doing it for a living. And I think the whole issue of scalability is really interesting. So how do you, I saw kind of a spectrum, if you like, where you've got at one end initiatives like the Imagineering, where you have to take people out of their everyday environments and put them somewhere else, and it takes a lot of time, and it can take resources away on doing other things, and it's a kind of a big event. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you kind of got, how do you embed this kind of activity and this way of thinking in kind of everyday education, so that you almost are unaware that it's STEAM, it's just the way it is. And I saw a real parallel with that with something which I was doing when I was doing some research with the NHS, where I was working with an emergency department in the hospital, and they wanted to engage the staff in that hospital in designing a better environment that would allow the emergency staff to restore from their stressful experiences. And the one thing they said was, we really want to get involved in some creative research, but we cannot take the time out of our day jobs to go and sit in workshops and do post-it notes and do all of this creative stuff. We just can't do it. So I had to design a process for them, which lasted over a long time, it was 4 months, where in very tiny bite-sized chunks, I turned them into designers and gave them the tools and methods, which were kind of very situated in the actual department, the emergency department, to actually allow them to become designers. So they became creative without them kind of really knowing it. And I just wonder whether sort of that type of approach could help here. And I don't know if that's the answer, but that's just from my own experience. I just saw so many kind of parallels. I guess I didn't really get around to the other tables, but a lot of the stuff we were talking about on our table was around the practical issues of how you actually do STEAM. So in terms of how much it costs, how much time it takes, how you actually get decision maker buy-in into it. And again, these are all kind of things that we see in real engineering as well. It's always a question of, okay, well, how do we get the chief decision maker to go? This is a good thing. And the way that we do it is we prototype, we simulate, and we show an ideal future of how it could be. So, and I think this is another question, is how do we create a vision of what the future of STEAM education could be? How do we prototype that and show it to the decision makers in order to get them to buy into how it could be better? And then another question, we didn't really talk about it, it was just something that was going around in my head, was how are we training teachers to teach in a STEAM-like way? I don't know the answer. But, you know, it goes back to we've got to educate people to think differently. They're going to educate others, and so how are we doing that? Sorry, that's a bit of a ramble really, but that's kind of what's been going around in my head.
Around creativity, and we're trying to develop creativity, aren't we, within children and across the context, because and Pat said, creativity delivered wrong is an absolute disaster. You know, creativity delivered right is the best thing in the world, and we're all here going, yeah, but delivered wrong. And so, how do we move schools from playing safe? Because what is happening is most schools are playing safe in the middle. It might be prescribed, I'll buy a syllabus and deliver it to jump through our measure, or I'll you know, we're working in a kind of key stage by key stage way, because that's safe. Because the reality is, if you get creativity wrong, it's a complete disaster. And the reason why creativity goes wrong is when time is invested in it. If I was going to perform as a musician and I didn't practice, we'd call it busking, okay? Well, teachers and need that time and the Imagineering to develop what is going to be their core purpose, which is teaching children. It's that investment in time, and that's the thing I think that comes around, and that's where our biggest challenge is, because it's time versus resource, because time is the biggest resource we have in terms of cost and cover and all of those things. And so the Imagineering project, from the point of view of being successful, of course it's successful because you've got a real genuine partnership there. You've got a group of people, whether they be engineers, whether they be artists, whether they be schools, that are investing time in a partnership with a real clear kind of collaborative model. And so that big investment led to a shared common purpose that started to see how creativity could work in engineering and science and start to pose questions. And so that by default was a self-fulfilling prophecy of success, because of the time investment that went into it prior to it happening. And if I think about how much time we had in terms of conversation with myself and Sarah and Joe prior to, we invested a huge amount of time just to deliver that 2-hour session in the afternoon to move the project forward. And so that's where the kind of missing link has been. And we talked about the reinventing the wheel, and I've used this before. You know, you hear in education, there's no point reinventing the wheel. There's every point reinventing the wheel. How are we going to come up with a hoverboard if you don't
Yeah.
So we've got to start changing the focus, and that's where we've got to be dared to be brave, because the government talk on is, by the way, it's Justine Greening who's now in charge of us all in school. She's just been appointed
really?
within the last 10 minutes. So that's, I don't know if that's a good thing or not. She's our new Secretary of State for Education. So.
Has Nick Gibbs gone?
I don't know. I'm not sorry. That's tomorrow. That's later. That's after lunch. We're having a coffee break before we hire the next group. That's the real key bit, because we've got to get under the skin of what is the purpose of education. And you know, whether we're looking at global partnerships or global comparative scales or all those, it's what is the purpose of education. And when we look at our kind of partners that we've been compared to, you know, we're not as good as we are. The balance between time invested in what they're creating and the delivery is very, very different. So we talked about Shanghai maths, and the maths teachers there who have 1 class or 10 lessons, and 8-hour days, 2 hours teaching, 6 hours planning. Well, funnily enough, that's going to be successful, isn't it? So not a surprise. You'd hope it would be, wouldn't you? And so how do we move schools to work in that way? Because we know Imagineering works. We know that way of working works, and the school's got loads out of it. But running the parallel equivalent in the class next door, because it was only 1 class that did it, and I got 2 from elementary school, huge amount of time investment to try and give them a similar experience, so there was a fairness across the year. So you've got to be that kind of. So it's what's the purpose? So the thing that I think comes out from all of that is what are we going to invest our time in? Is it the outcome, or is it the process? Do we want our children to be good at specific things, or do we want them to be a geographer? What is the key skill for them to be a geographer? What is the key skill for them to be an Imagineer? And one of the things that we brought out this project was what was it that made an Imagineer? Because that's a way of learning, and that's why things like this are so fantastic. Because it's the pedagogical approach that you should apply to every subject, how you come up. So that's the big challenge in education, is working with partners, but to apply it to a curriculum context that makes sense. So in a localised way. And again, I was talking about the Welsh and Scottish systems that are really beginning to look at developing a more localised, thematic-based, relevant curriculum. And I've literally just come back from South Wales, Pembrokeshire, with some children was there with 3 days doing some breakfast. We did some coastal work, did some surfing as well, which was very cool. But we looked at coastal erosion, and there was a house on the edge of the cliff. Okay, and so it's about us working together to pose the right kind of questions for children to discover the right kind of answers. So we didn't say, how can we stop the house from falling into the sea? Because off we go. We get some structures in place, and we asked the question, should we stop the house from falling into the sea? Straight away, you bring in every element of everything, don't you? And from is it ethical to do it? What's the long-term impact of doing that? It doesn't matter that we can, it's the should we. And I think if we can start to turn kind of our curriculums around to answer those key underlying questions, then we'll be able to answer them through science, through art, through working with industries, through soft skills, through all the things that we're constantly saying missing, to actually start to turn the children into the kind of learners and question answerers and question searchers or question seekers that we need them to be, to actually be adaptable whatever the system is and whatever the weird is. And so the overlay is really, really important. So I suppose to kind of, if the time be resource, which is the age-old, but that lives in every sector, but I think schools have got to be brave and have the mandate to look at the investment of time in planning, time in resourcing, and not more projects, because it's removing the time from the practitioner to be able to know what it takes to deliver the project themselves. And we've got to be careful that it doesn't disempower them just because it's cool, because a room of experts can disempower someone that's not kind of there. And so the collaboration between all the sectors is what works when every one of them has got a mandate and they then agree with the time and the mandate that makes that happen. So.
Thank you.